So good morning, everyone. I'm Craig Young, CTO of Swift. We're going to take you through kind of a broad view of the industry, current thinkings, and some calls to action from each of us. So with no further ado, we'll just get started. So, you know, in 2014 and in 2015, there's been significant data breaches across multiple sectors impacting hundreds of millions of users. Now, as I look through the trend of this year, it really hasn't changed. And I'm positive everyone in this room will agree that the frequency, speed, and effectiveness of sophisticated cyber attacks is increasing, and the cyber impacts and fraud have significant impacts to not only business but economy. And you know, the post-PC era is clearly here. It's already looking to be a more dangerous era as I think about the acceleration of cyber attacks against mobile devices, social media platforms, cloud, and Internet of Things. And there's a good saying, anything that can connect to the Internet can and will be hacked. So as the world is increasingly interconnecting and everyone connected to the Internet, including everyone in this room, at work or at home, we share the responsibility of securing our workspace. So some basic facts. I won't spend a lot of time on this slide, but clearly the banking and financial service industry is one of the primary targets for cyber attacks and cyber crimes, resulting in hefty costs and liabilities for organizations. Hackers are continuing to get past conventional perimeter security and executing several high-profile data breaches across the sector in the past few years, and more recently in the recent months. So I wanted to share some interesting facts here on the importance of cybersecurity. So the Director of National Intelligence for the U.S. Ranked cybercrime as the #1 national security threat. SEC Chairperson Mary Jo White recently called cybersecurity the biggest risk facing the financial industry. And for those who have 15, 16-year-old somethings home sitting on the couch wondering what to do with life, I will tell you cyber. Between 2017 and 2021, the expected global spend on cybersecurity will reach $1 trillion globally. So there's significant opportunity here as our threats continue. So how the threats are evolving. Information security used to be an add-on and really an afterthought onto all systems. Security today needs to be part of the cultural fabric of your employees and part of the DNA of the systems and processes you support. And this is because in the past 2 to 3 years, there's been exponential growth on the attack surfaces in the financial sector in particular. As you've seen the growth in mobile e-commerce, cloud deployments, and the number of connected devices grow, we'll see a further increase in planned attacks. And the amount of knowledge attackers can now get on a firm has increased rapidly, making the threats more severe every day. The adversaries we see here now are also an asymmetrical threat. The things we should be worrying about are the state actors or the very highly organized cybercrime or cyber criminals who are well-networked, well-funded, tech-savvy, and their collective intelligence is making them far more creative, resulting in a greater number of compromises. And it's very difficult to develop a strategy for a game when you don't know who you're playing against or who the quarterback is, and since we're in Canada, so who's playing in your forward lines, to understand how you can win. And the one way we can win is by being nimble, agile, and working together as one team. So to adapt to the changing threat environment, I think the industry really needs to establish a cyber program structure that is well positioned to address the emerging cyber risks. As I mentioned on the previous slide, the only way the industry can win is to be agile and nimble, and it should incorporate some notion of continuous improvement methodology, not only across emerging threats, but changes in technology, and more importantly, on internal and external incidents, so you can learn and how to change and adapt your security to support that. The strategy also needs to incorporate the right balance of prevention, detection, and response, and also the right investment strategy. Now, for those who hire cyber professionals for a living, I will tell you this is becoming increasingly more difficult when you look at the level of investment you make on your cyber team in terms of trying to acquire, retain, collaborate, and build the tooling that they need to support that. But then not only laying across that is deploying the right technology to maximize the utilization of it. You know, and although all the components I've listed on this slide are important, I'd specifically, again, like to emphasize the need for having a proactive, agile, and adaptive security team that can protect your network assets and your company assets. So lessons learned from recent events. What I've done here is really tried to pull out some common themes of what we've seen of recent. You know, I'd say input fraud continues to be a challenge across each of our industries. And this is where resilience, not prevention, is your key to defending the cyber threats in those areas. Supply chain. Current case going on right now in the US with Wendy's, where in fact the payment industry is suing Wendy's for not moving fast enough. You can go back to Stuxnet. You can take it back to Target, where our systems were compromised using their HVAC system controls. You know, and when you look at all these events, you know, I would say that some of the common theme is our industry needs to change the way we share cyber threat information, moving from who needs to know, but to who doesn't know, and how quickly can we get that information to them. So the next 5 years, I think the next 5 years will be characterized by uncertainty, complexity, rapid change, and persistent threats. But you know, and we'll likely face a much broader array of threats in the cyberspace, then we must be prepared to address them in the coming years. You know, so cyber vulnerabilities exist because the solution architecture was never built to support that. This industry, much like every other vertical I've worked in, have some systems that are 25 plus years old. They were not built for today's security standards or the business models that they were meant to support now. And for that, we need to retrofit security. So there'll be these types of threats until every one of us are on a common playing field, on a common security architecture, using a common framework. But until we get there, without a doubt, we'll continue to see increased planned organized cyber attacks, more hacking as a service offerings, greater need for integrated threat intelligence capabilities, better adoption of current frameworks, uniform sharing, and particularly as we get into further deployments of mobile technology along with the Internet of Things. On the other side, we very well will see more compliance, cybersecurity laws, regulations, frameworks, breach reporting laws, and it may become harder and much more expensive to secure your data and your company assets. So before I turn over to Beth here, I mean, just a comment, you know, I mean, certainly our next big challenge is to limit our attacks on our industry as a whole. But how can we do that without deploying new tools and enforcing new regulations or frameworks? You know, if I go back to 2012 and 2013, when denial of a service was the in-fad thing for the cyber attackers to get after the financial industry, what worked is we shared the IP addresses across the telco operators, across the financial community to block and thwart these attacks. Now, you know, I bring that point across because it worked very quickly and it was very effective. But what it didn't do is it doesn't prevent us from the unknown attacks we've not seen and the different surfaces they may come at us at. But the industry needs to have a vision to create new networks that allow us to share information more freely and in real time and go a step beyond what we're already doing with the FSI SACs. And this is, you know, instead of hiding, we share information more freely. And by sharing faster and with banks who don't get this information today, we can beat the adversaries by working as one team. And, you know, why can't we make a list of adversaries, their locations, their tactics, their histories, and share it openly? And lastly, I'd like to encourage all of us to increase our shared consciousness and common purpose here. You know, stay up to date, not only here in Canada, but more importantly, globally, on what's going on in cyber, and engage in real-time cyber intelligence, counterintelligence, and information sharing. Okay? So with that, I'm going to turn over to Beth to continue the conversation.
Great. Thank you, Craig. And good morning, everyone. So I'm Beth Petrie, and I am the head of Citi's Strategic Intelligence Analysis Group. And I joined Citi about 2.5 years ago. I came over from the US government. I'm an intelligence analyst by trade. I've been doing this for 20 years. I spent 15 years with the FBI studying criminal groups and cyber groups specifically in my last position. So I came to Citi with the express purpose of creating this strategic cell to have focused, dedicated effort in studying the tactics of the adversary so that we can customize defensive programs in order to be able to not just react to the tactics and what's going on today, but really be preemptive and proactive and do a lot of the work that Craig ended his comments on in terms of building networks among our clients, among even our competitors in this space, to really be able to share the information so that we know who it is that's coming after us. So Craig talked a lot about the escalation of cyber attack activity. So what does that really translate into, though, in terms of cost? If we're going to spend $1 trillion over the next 5 years in information security professionals, is it going to be enough? Because these are the types of costs that we are suffering and have suffered over the last year, which are pretty astronomical. Included within these cost calculations is not just exactly what has been lost in terms of actual money or data, but also the cost of cleanup to restore networks, to, in some cases, absolutely build from the ground up a network that has been compromised. And in addition to that, we also have to consider the cost of rebuilding reputation or even brand when a compromise actually happens. But a lot of times people ask me, why now? Why are we seeing such a dramatic increase in the cost? And I would say that there's a couple of factors that are going on. First and foremost, the rate at which businesses are digitizing the way that they're doing business is growing faster, I would say, within the last 2 years than ever before, because it's cost effective. We also have to consider the fact that Greg also mentioned the connectivity, the Internet of Things. Right now they say that there's about 5 billion networks or things that are connected together, but within the next 5 years that's going to grow to 50 billion connections. And every time you have a connection represents an opportunity for an infection. And then thirdly, we have the adoption of the internet. So it is still not completely global, but as it continues to be fully implemented within countries, you are giving a platform for adversaries to be able to attack us. So the bottom line, though, to these numbers and what it really means for us when we are getting out there and trying to defend against the attackers is the fact that if we don't come together and do this collaboratively, we risk seeing some of us go out of business. And quite frankly, that's bad for everybody. That is simply not competitive advantage. But you can't address a problem unless you understand exactly what the problem is. And this is where we spend the bulk of our time and resources, particularly within my group, is studying the various different groups of actors that we know to be coming after us. And they're broken down into 5 categories represented here, and this is widely adopted by the information security industry. So first and foremost, we have the nation-state actor groups. And the nation-state actors are governments that are investing in personnel that are trying to go after other countries for competitive advantage, for the most part. Stealing information that's really going to be able to allow them to further their country's interests, if you will. We consider these types of actors to be the most sophisticated and they are the most persistent. And the reason for that is because honestly, they are so well resourced, it's very difficult to keep up with them. They have the manpower, but most importantly, they have the infrastructure to be able to conduct attack activity. A group that was recently uncovered and was in the news in December of last year was a group called Dark Hotel. And it was a group that was focused on governments and think tanks as well as commercial entities that were dealing in, it was Northeast Asia issues. And the way that they accomplished their objective was to infect a hotel network within Asia in their Wi-Fi system so that when people traveled and connected to the Wi-Fi system, they were able to compromise information contained within their laptops. So that just shows a degree of sophistication that's very difficult to overcome if you don't understand that they have the capability to do that kind of activity. The second group of actors that we're very concerned about are the cyber criminals. And the cyber criminals are straight up financially motivated and their capabilities range. But what we're really concerned about with this group is their ability to communicate. It's absolutely seamless. Craig talked about our inability to communicate as a community, and the reason for that is very much related to country laws and regulations and the fact that we have corporate policies. But of course, the criminals don't have to abide by that. They have the cyber underground to be able to go out there and to sell their exploits and their tools and still make a profit without any risk. And so a couple of the trends that we're seeing with these groups, one is the business email compromise, which I think just about everybody in this room knows and probably unfortunately has been a victim of. This is an evolution from the CEO impersonation email scam, and now the newest technique that we have witnessed is that people are calling in representing themselves to be the legal entity for an organization and demanding payment in order for an actual project to be able to be completed because legal fees have to be paid. Another trend that we're seeing is ransomware. So CryptoLocker was very popular 3 years ago. This is where computers were being infected and victims had to pay a fee in order to have their files unlocked. Very much focused on the individuals versus corporations. But unfortunately, within the last year, we've seen an uptick in cyber extortion by way of ransomware, meaning that they are locking up files and continuing to demand payment over time, and when payment is not rendered, they end up destroying data. Very problematic. The third trend that we're seeing is point of sale malware. So this continues to be an issue as we all migrate over to chip and pin. Many times the POS systems are not completely fortified because they have to be able to allow magnetic stripe cards, and so we don't have full integration in the systems quite yet, and that's being exploited. In terms of the third group that we're dealing with, it's really about the cyber terrorists. And fortunately, their capability is very low at this point in time. We hear a lot in the news about ISIS and ISIL and people going out there and doing website defacements and attack type activity, but that's very low scale, and right now the community does not think that terrorist groups are actually telling them to go out and do this activity, that they're really acting on their own behalf. The fourth group that's represented up here is hacktivism, and I wanted to put them on the board here today because you've probably heard in any of the countries that you come from about Anonymous. So that's a collective that comes together, they pick out a social cause, and then they direct cyber attack activity against a particular entity in order to get, for the most part, publicity towards their causes. So a lot in the news over the last couple of years about Op Wall Street, an actual attack against the financial institutions. We have most recently, of course, the Olympics coming up, and so Op Olympic is in full swing right now. And then finally, we have to be concerned about the insider. And so the insider presents the threat of both a witting as well as an unwitting individual. So unwitting individuals, or anybody in this room, we can't resist clicking on the link that sent us to see that picture, and that could unintentionally infect the network. But the witting insider is the person that wants to go in and really cause harm against their organization. And we've unfortunately seen a lot, particularly within the US. We suffered a major insider threat that was posed by Snowden several years ago. And this kind of attack activity is something that we really have to focus on as its own particular threat issue because it's so unique to the behavior of people. So we lay out this landscape here for educational purposes to really show the complexity of the issue. Because very often people think, I don't get it, this cyber attack activity, just put the firewalls in place. But that's just not enough to be able to really adequately protect us. So the anatomy of a cyber attack is something that we also have to study because, again, as I said, attack activities, they don't happen overnight. Industry professionals say on average a persistent threat group that might be on the network could be on the network for 265 days before they're actually discovered. And that unfortunately is an average. So sometimes they can be on the network for several years and be undiscovered, and we simply don't know why. What is their objective? What are they looking for? It's very difficult to tell when you can't observe the type of information that is being downloaded from the system. But there's a lot of good news to this, and that's the fact that the attackers have to go through this anatomy every single time that they want to do an attack. And what that means for us as the defenders is we have the opportunity in 5 separate stages to customize a defensive plan to be able to get in there and to stop them from achieving their end objective. So the different stages represented here in this chart is the fact that the attacker needs to do full-on reconnaissance. They have to collect their information about the behavior of the organization that they want to go after or the individual. So that allows us the opportunity to reduce our footprint online, particularly when it comes to putting a lot of information out there on LinkedIn or other professional recruitment sites, or as a corporation, really revealing exactly what our business objectives are as we develop in certain countries. The second stage here is the initial compromise. So once the attacker has gone out there and said, this is who I want to go after, they have to be able to infect that system. And the number one compromise attack activity that's being used today is the spear phishing. It's 99% successful because it relies on the behavioral attributes of someone saying, oh, I got this email, it looks completely legitimate, I'm going to go ahead and download whatever it is that they're asking me to download. By doing that, the intruder is able to have control over that system. The third piece of this is establishing the foothold. So like I said, it doesn't happen overnight. They have to be able to come and go in the network as they please to accomplish their objectives. So that means opening up backdoors in the network so that if you see odd behavior in one area and you clean your network, they have the ability to come back and reinfect you. So this is an area where we really focus a lot on third parties and have to really better understand who we are doing business with, because that represents an opportunity for the attacker to find a vulnerability and be able to come into our networks. The fourth stage in this is escalating privileges, and this is all related to entitlements. It's the ability to move around the network, see what it is that's in the network, and be able to, if not just exfiltrate it, which is the final stage, to be able to observe the behavior on our networks. But if they are able to accomplish the last stage here with exfiltration, that means we've kind of lost the end game. They've taken the data, and now we're in a position of having to react to the attack activity. And we have plans in order to do so. So understanding who's attacking us, understanding the stages that they have to go through in order to accomplish a successful attack, you may be asking yourself, okay, that's all well and good, it's interesting, maybe a little scary, but what does it really mean to me? And so the answer to that question is represented on this slide in showing how financial flows within any corporation is the most sought after entity, not because of their ability to control the money, but because of the number of touch points they have within the organization as well as outside the organization, which means that if an attacker can compromise anybody within the financial flows sector, they are increasing their ability to be successful in their exploits. So with that in mind, there are a number of technical solutions that we have to be able to protect people who work in the financial sector of the organization specifically. And that's listed here with the 7 major programs that IT typically takes care of. So data protection has to do with encryption. Third-party information assessments is really understanding who it is that we're doing business with. Privileged user management access is understanding the level of entitlements that people have when they're able to move about our systems. It's very normal and it's very healthy for people to move from one area of the organization to another area of the organization for career growth. But sometimes we don't do a very good job of then removing the entitlements that they had in their old position. And over time, people can collect a lot of entitlements that if they are compromised, the attacker now has free rein to go into the network and they look like they legitimately should be in the network, which is a problem. Security incident management is really about being prepared. So it's not a matter anymore of if we're going to be attacked, it's the fact that it's when we're going to be attacked or the fact that we've already been attacked. So what is our plan to respond to that? The time to think about the plan is not the day that you find out you're attacked. You have to be able to understand who the points of contact are in your organization. Who's your information security officer? Do you know who that person is? If you see something odd in the network, do you know who to call and to report it to? That's absolutely critical to being able to catch the attack activity at the earliest point at which it's observed. The vulnerability assessment piece of this is really about locking down what kind of software or technology that's being developed that will be deployed on our networks. Is it going to potentially break the network or possibly infect the network? Global ID administration is understanding every single thing that connects to the network. That's the Internet of Things piece that Craig talked about. Refrigerators are sending out spam emails today. We see that. So we really have to understand on the corporate side everything that touches the network, and do we have a control for it. And big data is perhaps my favorite category on this list that also has to be combined with intelligence, because this is really the opportunity for us to study and be able to be proactive in understanding how the attackers are going to switch their tactics and what they're going to do next. And this really comes back to the central point of having our connections with one another, because the financial services sector might see something today, but real estate might see something tomorrow. And if we are communicating with one another and sharing that threat information, we have a greater chance of success in being able to defend ourselves. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Michael, and he'll talk more about the business implications.
Great. Good morning. Scary. It's a scary world out there, isn't it? Seems pretty ominous. My name is Michael Ma. I am the Vice President of Enterprise Architecture and Information Security, but enough with the long titles. I'm the translator. I take all of the technical projects and platforms and translate that for the business to understand, so what? What does that really mean for the business? I spend a lot of time sitting down with the risk management committees, sitting down with the board of directors to understand, what does it really mean when I hear about Sony in the news, when I hear about Home Depot in the news, when I hear about a lot of these organizations and some of the attacks that are happening? What does it mean? What do I have to do for my business process? What does it mean for our capital plans? What do we need to spend and invest in technology? Or is it a matter of educating our end users or the people who are using the systems that we have? Oops. The first sentence I usually tell people is the new reality. And what is the new reality? No one is immune. It's not about if it's going to happen. It's more about when. No company, no organization, it's happened right across the board. I think all of us on the panel here can have shared some war stories about things that are happening even today within the organizations that we deal with or the people that we work with. Cyber damage, it's not always about dollars. It's not always about financial risk anymore. If you think of it, the Sony example had nothing really to do about financials. It was not about extortion of money. It was about a reputation. They were sharing emails about some pretty insider conversations between individuals. Ashley Madison, I don't think there was one request for dollars. It was more reputational about the individuals who were participating in that environment, or with the organization about the protection of who those people really are. So it's not always about the dollars and cents. The controls that we have in place, firewalls, spam filters, those traditional controls are necessary, but they're not adequate. I usually say the best systems would be set up if we didn't have users. Individual users are one of the biggest areas where we have a potential for compromise. The speed of attack is increasing. I think Craig mentioned it and Beth mentioned it. We are seeing more and more activity. Our studies have shown, when we look at some of the emails that come in, for all of the national events or international events, the Nepal earthquake, the events that happened in Europe and in Belgium, that's when we saw a spike in the number of emails or number of malware that were coming into our environment asking people for donations. And it takes one click of someone saying, you know what, I'm a good person, I would like to donate to that event. That introduces risk and activity, a virus, spear phishing. It is those simple acts of individuals wanting to do good, but in fact you have people from the outside trying to infiltrate our systems. And if you think of that, that's a real scary proposition. Everything cannot be protected equally. The type of data that you collect is, you really need to understand it. How do you classify your data? Is an email, a conversation within a project, within a given context, is that really classified versus the financial data that you collect, your payment information, your wire confirmations, the data that you pass between your third parties? It's really about understanding the type of data. If we wanted to protect everything equally, that would cost billions and billions of dollars and not necessarily help our businesses interact, especially in a world where we have to interact with multiple parties, especially outside of our networks. Regulators and governments are key stakeholders. You see more and more regulations coming in to really focus on trying to help us from ourselves. How do we interact when we cross borders? Where does our information get stored? The regulations are increasing. I show this slide and I kind of pull out a couple of stats for the senior management team just to get a sense as to what's out there. I love the bubble diagram on the far left. Those are all of the biggest data breaches over the past 2 years. I'm sure some of you recognize some of those or have heard of those in the news or some of those names. Those grow year over year. 70% of all cyber attacks can actually have been prevented if we had patched our systems. You know, your Windows system, if you had applied the latest patch, the latest antivirus definitions, 70% of them actually could have been prevented. As Beth mentioned, insiders, whether you be inadvertent actors, people just clicking on an email, a link in an email, or malicious insiders, 60% of all cyber attacks are carried out by those insiders within the four walls of your organization, and you don't even know it. So again, it is the new reality that we face today. Our approach, so what we've really focused on is ensure we have the right governance in place, having the right, internally, the right people talking to the right folks. And then eventually spreading that out to some of our key third parties, having the right policies in place. It's not always about IT policies. It's about, do you have the right accounts payable processes to know that an email that says, please wire this money to this bank account is not the right approval process. Controls. Do you have the right controls in place? Do you test those controls on a regular basis? And does everybody understand those controls? Do we attest on an annual basis the acceptable use of how you use your computer? I'm sure everyone will raise their hand, and this will not be a poll question, but how many people save their favorite pictures on their local your corporate issued laptop? Your favorite pictures of your family, your favorite MP3s, your favorite movies that you get from wherever. Well, I'm sure if you went back to your acceptable use policy, that's probably not allowed. And then testing, as I mentioned, not just internally testing, but having third parties come in and test, are the people, are your staff, are your employees, are your users following these controls? And you'd be surprised about some of the results. And I'll share a couple of stories on some of the results that we've seen on a couple of tests that we provided. And all of that leads to having the right plans in place, whether it be incident response, as Beth mentioned, the DR plan, business continuity plans, and crisis management in the event something actually happens. So I boil it down to the ABCs. It's very simple to really understand, you know, when I talk to organizations and how do we, and I don't want to use the word improperly, but dumb it down to say, what do you really need to do? You need to assess your risks. Understand what is critical to your organization. Is it a certain business process? Is it a certain piece of data? Is it a certain set of resources? Are your certain third parties more critical than others? Assess those risks and continually assess them. Build the right policies. As I mentioned, we have information security policies, acceptable use policies, policies around how you engage third parties. We have a policy where we have to complete a security and risk assessment of every third party coming into our network who wants access. Every new application we want into our environment has to go through a security and risk assessment. But it's not just IT policies. Do you have the appropriate accounts payable policies? Do you have the appropriate approval policies? Do you have the appropriate policies on how you can do wire transfers, check requisitions, and other electronic forms of payment? Choose the right controls. You need to know what you need to secure, what controls you need to have in place, and how you tell people what those controls are. They need to be simple. And if they keep it simple, the KISS method, it needs to be simple so people can repeat those on a day-to-day basis. Deploy those controls uniformly across your organization. Another key thing to look at. And then education. Educate your employees, educate management, educate all of your critical third-party providers and your vendors. We spend a lot of time trying to bring security awareness to the forefront of everybody. We try to post on our intranet as many times as we see these phishing attacks, email, malware that comes in. We try to remind them, you need to be very vigilant about what comes in. And then further assess. As I mentioned, not only do we do internal assessments, we test people. So we sent an email to a group of IT staff who should know stuff about don't click on links from people you don't know. And in the email it said, win an iPad, click on this link. How many IT staff would you think clicked on that link? 50% of IT staff. And that is the industry average from our repeated exercises. 50% of the people who know better actually clicked on the link in hopes of winning a new iPad. And all it takes is one person and IT staff who typically have elevated access to click on the link, and all of a sudden your networks, your environment is compromised by a third party. 50% happens to be the actual average that most of these phishing tests or exercises, when you roll that out to people, 50% of the people actually click on that link or provide their user credentials. It's a scary number. But the only number that can be reinforced is by re-educating, making sure you enforce annual security awareness training, go through anti-bribery and corruption training. So we provide a lot of online training material, but we also require that every staff must go through this on an annual basis. Audit and test. So we have an internal compliance team that really focuses on trying to get the right, test all of these controls, make sure users are aware of the policies. We test our third parties. We have contractual terms that we put in with our key service providers that we say we have a right to audit. We ask our third parties that they have to provide a list of any security incidents or events that happened over the past 12 months, and this is an ongoing thing. The actual investment we spend on looking at contracts, looking at using our compliance team to help audit and review our third-party vendors is increasing, even more so than some of our other areas within the organization. So with that, I think we'll leave you to one last poll question, which I think we can pull up. And it really talks about educating our employees. So if you like to pull out your app and answer the question, when was the last time you were asked to complete online security awareness training? And I hope the 0% that says greater than 12 months stays at 0%. So it's under 10%, so I think that's a positive between 1 and 6 months. So we generally see, and when I talk to the group of companies as I lead a cybersecurity council internally for the Brookfield group of companies, it's more between 6 and 12 months traditionally. But we are trying to introduce more ways to try and improve that awareness. That probably might be a never. Which is something to always consider. And there are a lot of great institutions out there like the SANS Institute and many of the security providers, Symantec, InfoSec, that provides some great online training material at a very reasonable cost. And it really is just to raise awareness. It's not to 100% cover everybody, but it's certainly to provide some awareness as people are inadvertently or are inadvertent actors that we see in this space. So with that concludes kind of the presentation from both Craig, Beth, and myself. We're happy to take any questions we have at this point.
Great, and I think you also seen a good backdrop of the foundation, the realities, and how to implement, and the how. So again, we welcome any questions from the audience.
I have a question about, and I don't know if this is the right term, but cyber ransom. So and we've had a pretty high-profile case recently in Canada about that. So I'd be interested in your perspectives on that, the prevalence, and also maybe sort of the policy implications of actually paying it to release your systems and what message that sends from any of you.
Sure. So the question was regarding the ransom extortion issue that is certainly on the uprise, unfortunately, and what potentially the policy implications could be, as well as whether or not people are actually paying, right? Is that what you were asking? Yeah.
How prevalent is it?
Yeah. Unfortunately, yes, it is definitely increasing, and it's more prevalent among small to medium-sized businesses versus large corporations. And the reason for that is that large corporations have the capability and redundancies to be able to reboot certain areas of the network. So it's not as profitable for them to go after the larger networks. The smaller and medium-sized companies, if they don't have the ability to do the backups and storage of data, they're losing everything. And so they have to make that payment. But law enforcement is definitely engaged worldwide on this issue, and very, very helpful to, and again, many times corporations won't call law enforcement, but it's very, very helpful if they do reach out, because law enforcement does have capabilities that could potentially be able to unlock and free up their data or the things that are being taken.
And actually, in last year's Cybo session, we had a couple cyber series, and we actually polled the audience of who would pay, and overwhelmingly it was no one from the financial community. Yes, sir.
What you said makes a lot of sense. And it's also pretty familiar to people who are involved in any large organization. And my sense is that most large corporate organizations or government would say that they follow. So I have a kind of a behavioral economics. The people who manage the risks inside these groups, they earn a salary. And the fact of the matter is they'll get that salary whether they succeed in avoiding an attack. People that are trying to attack these systems have a low probability of huge gain in terms of whatever their objective is. And I guess the question is, from a strategic point of view, how can you win in that?
It's a broad question. Look, I think the reality is you're completely correct in saying I think many large institutions do a good job of protecting their core assets. Really where you start to see challenges is when you start to spread across the integration space, where clearly you're only as secure as your weakest link, as we've seen in some more recent incidents. Getting to, and I'll be very specific here, as we look at to our customer program, in establishing a framework that not only requires a certain level of security, but the ongoing auditability of that. Only as we work in concert to support those can we succeed. And I'll pass it to any of the other folks in terms of your thoughts.
It's not. I think corporations are moving away from just saying it's the risk manager's responsibility, which you're talking about them getting a salary. Will it keep up with the pace of what they're expected to do to protect the firm, and really extending that the issue is everybody's problems. Every single one of us have a responsibility to maintain updates on passwords and not give them out, or give our safe word cards out, and our, all of that other very rudimentary, basic security principles that people continue to not implement over and over and over again. And so I think that that's going to help balance the scale a little bit, because you have to push out the responsibility across the organization.
And I guess I'll add one other piece that we're certainly focused on, is trying to identify service levels and metrics that we can evaluate our third-party providers and our departments around understanding the policies, understanding what a security incident is, and not having one in your department. And so trying to tie performance or evaluation based on certain service levels, and we're trying to figure out what's the right metric to calculate to say, not only is 100% of our staff going through security awareness training, but we have not had any incidents, or this is how we reacted to it, or this is the right communication that we had to the appropriate stakeholders. So we're trying to find a right measurement to be able to articulate, if you don't meet a certain target, there are ramifications and implications.
So the detection tools are very, very good, but they're only as good as how well they are implemented. So particularly when you're talking about the insider threat issue, the tools are definitely there to be able to establish abnormal behavior patterns, but many times corporations don't start with the appropriate baseline on what normal looks like for the network to be able to have early detection on abnormal type behaviors.
In such a fast-moving environment, are regulators by their nature able to keep up, or by the time the regulations come out, the attackers have moved on?
To be honest, I think we've come a long way in the past 12 to 18 months. We've seen the regulations come in. The NIST framework for cybersecurity has been been adopted very broadly across the financial services industry. I think regulation, certainly in North America, is picking up the pace. Arguably, and I appreciate Beth and Craig's input as well. The European Union has always been the forefront. The UK has been the toughest traditionally in terms of regulation and regulatory and statutory requirements. But I think you're seeing a much more predominant role that the regulators in North America are now starting to try and play to try and govern and get everyone to a certain level in terms of how we operate and interoperate.
And we're seeing a review of our programs on a more holistic scale versus previously regulators were coming in and saying, demonstrate all of your controls. Now they're starting to ask the question, how are you using intelligence to inform what controls you should be using on your systems?
Yeah, and clearly what we see is much more active support from regulators on helping define requirements and being able to enforce them at the local level.
I would add part of it is also they're trying to get more information themselves. So they're really starting to encourage large organizations to share their information. I think that's the biggest way to address some of these things, is to share information. One would argue you hear more about these incidents because people are willing to share that information more. Previously, they would tuck it underneath the covers and just say, not really talk about it. I think there is now certainly an openness and a willingness to discuss when something happens, how they're addressing it, and starting to work with other organizations to try and say, well, have you experienced this as well? What are some of the things that you can help mitigate this? So there is starting to be, at least from my perspective, some ability and willingness for people to share information from all the levels, whether it be a regulatory group, whether it be other organizations or within the industry. People are starting to talk about it more, which only helps all of us try and prevent the bad guys from getting in.
Time for about one more question.
Great.
All right.
Good.
Thank you
Well,
so
thank
much
you
for your
very much.
attention.